let's hit it.
And welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
All right, here we go. What you think about, you will bring about.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm thrilled you're joining us. If you are new to our show, Alzheimer Speaks is about sound information, not just sound bites. We like to have real conversations with real people at all different levels all around the world. And so today we're going to be talking about a journey of a lifetime, a father and a son living with dementia, bike across dementia. I should say the father has dementia, and his son accompanied him with this bike across dementia. But before I introduce our guest, I always like to do a little bit of a shout out. And first, I want to always shout out to the band, Mark Arneson's band, who allows us to play Clarion Call, which is our opening music. I just love that song. And you can go ahead and download that on any of your platforms that you choose to listen to music to. For those of you that aren't aware, Alzheimer Speaks has updated their website, so you have to check it out. It's much easier to maneuver. We have one whole page dedicated to a variety of free resources. One of them is Dementia Map, which is a global resource directory, which is free to use, and you don't have to sign in with an account. But you can access our radio show, dementia chats, quick tips, get information about becoming dementia friendly or memory cafes, and also various programs out there, such as September 20th, I'm going to be doing a program for Artist Senior Living called Realities of Dementia, and that's going to be family-friendly tips and tools. And then on October 31st, I'll be out in Minnetonka for a live event, which is open to the public, and we're going to do a screening of A Timeless Love with a Talkback, which is just a fabulous, fabulous Hollywood film about dementia. And don't forget to check out Saltbox TV. That's a free online streaming service that was designed specifically for seniors. So not only do you have the old TV shows and movies, but there's all kinds of health and wellness and great educational information there as well. And if you're looking for support groups on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month at 1 o'clock Central Time, which would be 2 o'clock Eastern Time, I do one sponsored by Arthur's Senior Care. And we've got people from Belgium and New Jersey. We're located here primarily in Minnesota, but anyone is welcome to join us. And then if you are in Minnesota, on the last Wednesday of the month at 10 o'clock Central, we do a Caregiver Connect, which is sponsored by Brookdale Senior Living of North Oaks. So lots of great information to be had that you can access. We are going to hear from the about the foot bar walker from the Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner, and then I'm going to introduce you to our guest today. We'll be right back.
I love the foot bar walker, and let me tell you why. It is the option for my toolbox that I've been waiting for. Let's be honest. There are some clients who, despite our best rehab efforts, just aren't able to return to performing a sit-to-stand transfer on their own. Now I can offer my caregivers an easier, safer option that doesn't involve hoisting their loved one up from a sitting position. I don't recommend this walker for all of my clients, but I do recommend this walker for those caregivers looking for an easier, safer option with transfers. I would also encourage other therapists to add this walker to their toolbox. It's kind of like having my own mobile parallel bars for the client to pull up on. Whether it's a family caregiver at home helping a loved one with Parkinson's or dementia, CNAs in a long-term care facility assisting their patients, or therapists adapting to client and caregiver-specific needs, we now have a very safe and effective option to offer in the Footbar Walker. Check this product out at thefootbarwalker.com. That's it for today from Adaptive Equipment and Caregiving Corner. Have a great day, and don't forget, if you can't do it, adapt it.
Well, we are back, and we are going to be talking about this father and son journey biking across America. And I am thrilled to have Kari Loya with us, who is a educational leader and author of Conversations Across America. And I have to apologize because I am just stumbling over my words today, and I know it's because I have not eaten yet, and I should know better. His book is about a father and son journey of a lifetime. They spent 73 days, and they went 4,600 miles biking across the country back in 2015. And Kari and his 75-year-old dad, Merv, who had early stage Alzheimer's, explored the world and their relationship on this journey. So I do also want to remind people that we are live today. So if you have questions and you're listening live, please feel free to call in. That number is 232-870-4602. That is 323-870-4602. And Kari, I'm just thrilled to hear this story. So welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori, and thank you for all of the wonderful work you're doing to make the world a little better.
Well, it takes all of us working together, to push things forward. And I think when you are personally touched, you kind of like you don't know what you don't know until all of a sudden you know it, and then you see where all the missing parts are and where the cracks are in the sidewalk and where they need to be filled. And it's been just such a pleasure on my journey to meet so many others like yourself who have done something special to kind of fill those gaps. So, I mentioned that your dad had early onset. If you can give us a little bit more background maybe on that, and then also, were there others in your family or circle of friends that were also dealing with some form of dementia?
Yeah, so my first experience with Alzheimer's was my grandfather. And so my grandfather had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the time. And so this is 20 years prior, and I was a high school senior, and my grandparents came out to visit us. We were in Oregon, they were in Illinois. And this was as a freshman in high school. And I have very clear memories of my grandfather coming. And my grandmother would shepherd him around, and he was very polite, but it literally was like talking with a polite 6-year-old. He had no knowledge of who I was, and so that was my first exposure. And he passed 3 years later, and there was a very, we weren't nearby, but my grandmother endured a lot, and I would hear kind of the story afterwards, trying to be the primary caregiver as long as she could. And so my dad always had that in his mind that, hey, this is hereditary, can be likely hereditary. And so he was trying to do everything he could to avoid that through kind of healthy lifestyle. But at a certain point, about 2012, a few years before this trip in 2015, my dad, we were meeting, again, we were in the Midwest, and he mentioned that he had just had a CAT scan of his brain, and they had said it shrunk significantly. And they said, they didn't say early stage Alzheimer's. They used a euphemism and said, you've got mild cognitive impairment. But clearly that was, we were heading in a certain direction. And so over those next few years, started to see a number of symptoms, kind of behavioral changes and family, friends, growing concerns around Merv. He was living independently at the time at the home in Eugene, Oregon. But there was a growing alarms and concerns around that. This is all prior to the trip in 2015.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's spooky when you've got somebody living alone on top of it because, how is that monitored? Are they seeing and feeling any of that? Are there people around them that can really stay on top of it? I know my mom, my mom and dad were married, but man, she could hide it good. She could
Yep.
really step up to the plate. And, my brothers are like, she's fine. And my dad and I are like, no, not so much. There's something going on here.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until things got, really major that
Yep.
they were willing to see that. And so it gets really, really tricky for sure.
Yeah. And, I think that monitoring is really important. Just two quick notes on that. Number one is, one of the benefits of doing this trip was since I had been living in New York, my sister was away in Hong Kong. And so we would see my dad for brief visits, but we weren't there, day in, day out, monitoring everything. And since he didn't live with anyone, again, there's no kind of tight oversight. And so this trip was going to give me a chance to see really 24/7, because rarely would we be more than 10 feet apart. And for more than 70 days straight, I knew that this was going to be an incredible chance for me to see up close with my own eyes, make my own judgments of where he was with all of this. And then one other note, which is you talk about kind of fooling those around. I had to laugh. This is about a year after the trip. There, and you'll know these, and forgive my the kind of the standard dementia tests that they administer. There's a couple of them. Merv kept passing all these things, and my mom, who's Merv's ex-spouse, my sister and I, and a couple of, we were like, that's like, this doesn't make sense. He keeps passing, but we're seeing all this stuff. And finally, the main doctor said, you know what? He said, hey, I wanted to let you know I've administered this test. This time I did it myself because Merv had such, I think he had such a developed executive functioning that basically he knew how to beat the test and fool the staff. And it happened for like 2 years. And so he's like, I finally administered this myself, and I was like, oh yeah, we're revoking his license, And but I just, again, it's such a reminder of that, that people can fool folks in short conversations. And so anyways, that I think that's so important to get a real read on where people are.
Well, and it could be so hard. I remember, with my mom, she was really having difficulty, and back then, this was almost 35 years ago now, and she kept bringing it up to her doctor because she was concerned, and he just kept poo-pooing it off to her hormones. And then finally, when she did do a test, all they did was a 10-question test, and she had a great day. And she came out strutting like a peacock because she told them a couple of colors of Crayola that they didn't even know, and then it was like, it's not approachable anymore. And that, that hurt us as a family because they didn't do enough testing. And then it was like 10 years later before we could get her back in. And my dad by then had been diagnosed with brain cancer, and then it was just totally horrendous because she failed horribly 2 half days of testing and came out like a wet noodle and didn't want to live. I mean, it was horrible. And so, I encourage people to get in earlier, but to really push for adequate testing. And it's hard because when you're new to all of this, you just assume the doctors know what they're doing and what is needed, and so many of them really don't. You have to get to a neurologist that really specializes in dementia and has a team to support. In my personal opinion, that's what I think anyways.
Absolutely.
So, what inspired you to go on this journey with your dad? You said, well, you wanted to really get a feel, but I'm sitting back thinking, oh my gosh, what a way to find out, when you're biking across the country that maybe this isn't going to work the way I thought it was going to work. How did you balance that out?
Well, I guess so. The first question about kind of the inspiration. So we had, so as I mentioned, I grew up in Eugene, Oregon. That's where my dad lived and eventually passed. And we had, since I was a kid, talked about biking across the country. And what I later discovered was that the Transamerica Bike Trail, which was set up in 1976 by an outfit that later became the Adventure Cycling Association in Missoula, Montana, they organized this cross-country bike ride to celebrate America's bicentennial. And so in 1976, there were 4,000 riders from 50 states and 14 countries that started in Astoria, Oregon, and headed east to Yorktown, Virginia. And they crossed 10 states, and there's a couple 100,000 feet of climbing, just this incredible adventure. And so what I discovered, though, is that riders on that trip, on like day 2 or 3, they passed through Eugene. And so Merv, my dad, had seen, and I didn't remember this, but he remembered speaking with riders, seeing that. And so I think that was the initial seed in talking about doing a cross-country bike adventure. And so Eugene is a very progressive place, and so my dad in the 70s was biking to work. He was commuting to work by bike. And we had done a couple triathlons in 1982 and 84, 20 years before most people knew what that was. And then we did when I was in just before my 9th grade year, we did a 3-day, 300-mile ride around Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Yellowstone National Park. His parents had a small cabin nearby. And so that gave us kind of this first taste of adventure and bike travel. And so since then, we talked about doing this cross-country bike trip, but it had never come to fruition and came very close in 2001, right before I went to grad school, but it didn't happen. And so in 2014, actually January, February of 2015, when I had received an offer for a new work opportunity, and I realized, I could leave my current situation. That gives a window of about 4 months. There's this chance that for us to finally do what we've talked about doing. And even though we know that there are these growing concerns, alarms, et cetera, this is probably the one chance we will have to do this, follow this dream. And so basically said, okay, well, let's quickly pull the trigger, and what do we have to put in place to make this happen? And so we jumped into that. And in just a few weeks, literally got gear, the basic gear that we need, listed my dad's house for sale, because that was one of the big things. We were trying to help him downsize and get out of that. So we cleaned that up, listed it for sale. And then we did one quick test ride about a week before we were scheduled to fly back east, where it was, we literally got the bikes, and in the dark, we biked about 15 miles in the dark in a little bit of rain, carrying a little bit of weight. And we went up one hill, and my dad was smiling in all of this. And I said, okay, all right, we did that. Now all we need to do is do something like that about 4 times a day with breaks in between, and we'll take it one day at a time. And so that was kind of the test to make sure that we weren't totally crazy, that we could do that. And then pretty soon we were dipping our rear wheel in Yorktown, Virginia, and we chose to go east to west for 2 reasons. One is we wanted to. I think most people agree that the most spectacular scenery in the country is Rockies and West. And then secondly, we wanted to end in our home state of Oregon, and so that would just make it kind of that last state dessert.
Where you could collapse.
Yeah, so we collapse in our home state. If we're going to die, we'll die in our home state.
I just think, oh my gosh, that's just such an endeavor. I just think it's just a miraculous task that you just seized and said, we're going for it. And I just think it's absolutely incredible. What is one of your favorite memories of your dad on this excursion? Do you have 1 or 2 that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, so many, I think if you curve if you were to kind of graph this journey, you've got 10 states. The first 3 3, because it's not like we were training for 6 months and preparing. It was like 3 weeks. If we don't see this in 3 weeks, it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, those first 3 states were really tough.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it wasn't clear that we were going to be able to pull this off.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we got through those first 3 states, suddenly it was like, okay, we're still standing. And then we got, by the time we got to Colorado, and, I guess that would be the spot where Colorado is the 5th state, but it also has Hoosier Pass, which is up over 11,500 feet, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it crosses over into Breckenridge, and it represents the highest point on the Trans-America Bike Trail. And so I knew that after we crossed that, we had basically something like 30,000 feet down, a net 30,000 feet down to or 16,000 feet, whatever, down to the Pacific Ocean. And so that's where, for the first time, it was like, okay, we can pull this off, and Merv can pull this off. And so I think the highlight was just seeing Merv, a 75-year-old with early stage Alzheimer's, who on any one of the 73 days could not tell you what town we started in and what town we ended in, but who was capable of pedaling slowly and steadily up a snowbank-lined mountain pass in Colorado with a smile on his face. That, for me, was just magical.
Wow. That would be. And it is amazing what they grasp a hold of and how things are expressed. And, very, very cool. Now, what about, I would imagine you had some pretty difficult times, too, on the journey, probably for yourself and for your dad, I would imagine.
Yeah. There are a few types of kind of major challenges. The first, obviously, was just a fitness challenge. Could we actually do this? And on day 5, we just had a real hard reality check, where we were going down the Blue Ridge Parkway, and suddenly Merv's walking his bike. Because there's a lot of climbing that we just weren't in shape for. And so, okay, that's all right. We'll adapt. And so I take one of his panniers and load it up on my bike. We go 10 more minutes, and then Merv's walking his bike again. Okay, all right, we'll adapt. And after about 3 of these iterations, there's suddenly no more weight for me to take. And I look like I'm carrying all of my life's possessions on my bike. And we literally stop at the side of the road and take a nap. And stopping and sleeping in the next, let's just get to the next town. But that was kind of the first major test of, okay, can we even pull this off? We may not even be able to do this. So, but the upshot is we got in better shape as we went. The second really was a cold factor. And this was, in ideal circumstances, we would have started later in the year. We started on April 14th because I had to report for my job by July 1st. And so that meant we were going much earlier than most people do for the cross-country bike trip. And that's why we had the snow in Colorado, and we had snow and cold temperatures elsewhere. And so in Virginia, 10, that was probably the closest we came to calling it quits. We camped out, at kind of a little spot there in the Blue Ridge Mountains there. And the challenge was that Merv, at 75, as many males over 40 or 50 can identify, had frequent trips to the bathroom. And it's one thing when you're at home. It's another thing when you're in a sleeping bag in a tent. And so by the time he would unzip everything and go through this kind of obstacle course to get out to go to the bathroom, come back, his sleeping bag was cold. And he did that multiple times during the night. And so that morning on day 10, he had gotten an awful night of sleep, just shivering. and we took basically a rest 20 hours in this next town. But that was the closest we came to throwing in the towel when we realized, okay, well, one of our adapting moves will be, even if it breaks our budget, we will, if the temperature is going to be below 48, that was kind of the threshold I figured, we'll stay in a little motel, whatever we got to do, because that will keep us alive. So keep the trip alive. And so that was another hard challenge. And then there's the bigger challenge of Alzheimer's, and understanding really on, from day one, okay, what are these additional challenges that we're going to face because of the Alzheimer's? And so that, there was everything from the, confusion, place and time, and suddenly is Merv going to wander off? And, oh my gosh, I've lost him already. There was, on day 4, he comes out of the bathroom in the morning, ready to start the day, and he's got his Lycra shorts on completely inside out. And there's this bright red padded crotch, kind of screaming like a bullseye. And that's, so I'm like, oh, okay, all right, Dad. Hey, I make him aware of his fashion blunder, and we get him squared away. But there were a number of things like that where it was clear that there were going to be some additional challenges than just an ordinary difficult bike challenge.
Yeah, when you had said, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and then I was going to say, and then I'm probably to fast forward then was, if you go through the 10 states, the first 7 states, really, it was like, okay, it was focused a lot of just logistics. Okay, can we do, let's get to the next town, this, that. And so there weren't a lot of other, what I'd call deeper conversations. But by the time we got to Idaho, the next to last state, now we were in a little rhythm, and it was like, okay, we've got this. And so we were starting to have a chance to have some deeper conversations. And during that time, Merv's house that we had listed for sale just prior to departing received an offer. And so we then sold that. And when I shared the news with Merv, that triggered a whole series of some tough conversations. And I think people that are in these shoes, there's a certain kind of volatility or rationality that comes up with folks with Alzheimer's. And when I shared that news, that again we had planned for this, et cetera, the direct quote was, so you want to lock me in a cage and throw away the key? That was the verbatim quote as we're pedaling along. And so we started to have some and I can go through that in more detail, but basically over the next week, then we had some really difficult, but then some good, healthy conversations trying to talk about Alzheimer's and what kind of where he was, what these next steps were.
Oh gosh, I can't even imagine being on the trip and the stress that you have, and then selling the house and having to deal with that, and then the conversations. I mean, I remember. And this is minute compared to what you were dealing, but just it took me 3 months to convince my mom not to wear a bra, because we tried all different types of bras and she couldn't hook it, and she was getting so frustrated. We tried the hooks in the front and the back and the over all kinds of stuff, and she was livid, just livid over that. I can't even imagine if we were dealing with her home on how that would have gone over, because sometimes they just, she would just hold on to sometimes the strangest things, and selling your home is not a strange thing. I mean, that's kind of the core of who we are, when we've lived there that long. I did want to ask you, because one of my fears when you said, well, we just slept on the roadside, were you scared that, you might get hit by a car, or somebody might come by and do something, or your dad would just wander off when you were sleeping? I mean, those 3 things all hit me right away, going, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. I mean, so again, for context, our sleeping accommodations were everything from, on 2 occasions, which included a celebration, the last night when we were in Astoria, Oregon, but then in Yellowstone, where per the condition that I outlined, which is if the temperature is going to be low, we've got to stay in a motel. Well, in Yellowstone, you're limited to basically one option. So there was we we splurged and blew like basically the whole budget, on because we couldn't camp there because it was going to be too cold. And so we did everything from a high-end motel to just really simple, kind of almost like trucker motels, to churches opened their doors for cyclists in many places. There's an outfit called Warm Showers where people volunteer to host cyclists. So we stayed in a few private homes and then some campgrounds. And then on two occasions, at least two occasions, on one case we literally camped behind a gas station. On one, we camped next to a fire station. And on another case, our first night in Oregon, we actually did. It was just kind of 15 feet off of the highway there, just in the middle of nowhere, because that's what we had. And and so to answer your question, I wasn't. The first week I was concerned about Merv wandering off. After that, I kind of had a sense of, okay, I was tracking his movement. I wasn't concerned. I wasn't concerned about any other random acts of violence or anything like that against us. So no, that wasn't a concern.
Okay, well that's good. And part of that I would imagine is just coming out of the world we live in today. I mean, you just hear weird story after weird story, with things from losing control of a vehicle to intentional, kind of madness, on the road of what people do.
And so I think on that note, it's actually important to just kind of counter that with, it's amazing how many people, how all across this country, how many kind people, generous people there are that are willing to help you out in different ways. And that's reserved for the final 30 seconds of the newscast, right? And the reality is, we had, that was most of our experience, not negatives.
Wow. And I think that is so true. And it's, it's kind of squashed down because it doesn't get the ratings. And I think it would get the ratings if they did it more. I think people really like the good news and not all the horrific stuff that's out there. It kind of slides me into my next question about what did you learn about America as you guys traveled the country?
Yeah, I think, the first thing, kind of just echoing or repeating what I just said, which is America is full of, very well-intended, kind, generous people, who are helpful and want to try to help. I think that's number one. You see an incredible diversity. And most of this was in rural America, and even in rural America, you get a range of industries. I mean, we talked with everyone from coal miners to farmers to entrepreneurs to people walking across this country to immigrants to illegal immigrants there's just this incredible range of folks and the perspectives that they have, and then you when you start talking with these folks, it's amazing to hear all of their dreams and disappointments. And, when you pedal a bike, unlike a car, and you're there with just your two wheels and nothing, kind of no walls, glass, steel protecting you, it's amazing how people come up curious. And what often starts with oh, hey, where are you guys headed? Or where are you coming from? It quickly leads to a longer conversation, and if you and pretty quickly, if you flip it around and start listening, they start sharing all their where they're from, their background, and so often they jump into those like, oh, I've always dreamed of this, or oh, one of the best things I ever did was that, and so it's just a reminder of those are things that light people up, dreams. Whether it's something they're dreaming about or something that they did, and I think that's just a reminder. And then you learn about tragedies. People share, oh, I wanted it, but then this happened, and so that's part of life. And so I think it's just a reminder to all of us of okay, if there are some dreams, let's get out there and pursue them, because tomorrow is not guaranteed for anyone.
Ain't that the truth? That is very true. I think, these stories like yours are so inspiring. It's so out of the box, and you're taking the risks that so many people are just afraid to, or they've been told they can't do, and they've listened to those voices instead of saying, we're going to try it. If it doesn't work, we'll adjust. But we're going for it.
Yeah.
Nothing to lose here, and really everything to gain, especially with your relationship.
I think you just said something that's so important, that can'ts. And
Mm-hmm.
what I found was just from that kind of initial diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, every conversation with Merv, with friends, with family, it all became focused on the can'ts and the can'ts. What can't, we can't do this, we can't do that. And I think anyone with any sort of disability goes through this, right? People focus on what they can't do. Mm-hmm. And Alzheimer's is no different. It's a disability that increases, and so the no's and the can'ts just increase. And so amidst that growing sea of no's and can'ts, we made a bold decision to say, okay, he can't do this, he can't do that, he can't do this, he can't do that. I get it. But you know what? He just biked 15 miles here, and he was totally fine, smiling. Oh, boy, what would happen if he has a good Sherpa, someone guiding him? Mm-hmm. And you know what? If we can just string, let's say, 4 times, whatever, a couple hundred of these together, 15 milers together, it's like he might actually be able to pull this off, and because that's what he can do. Mm-hmm. And he did. I mean, it's amazing. And just one other note on that, as we drove down from Dulles Airport down to Yorktown, Virginia, there, kind of day zero, right before we started. It was with Merv, and my aunt drove us down, and we were speaking with Merv in the car, and he was talking, and he was saying, he's like, oh, I feel I've got this vice around my head, and he was pointing to his kind of temples, and he's like, I remember my dad saying that, talking about that, and I have this now around my head, and I get kind of this tightness in my chest, and so I made a point then of asking Merv on every day of the journey, hey, how's your head feeling? And how is your chest feeling? Those two things that he would complain about, he never had an issue with those the 73 days we were cycling.
Just that interesting. That is really, really interesting.
I think we're so far behind right now, still on kind of connecting the body, mind, soul, all that. We're starting to connect all that, but not a pill. It's by for whatever biking all day, plenty of other challenges we were facing, but biking all day in the outdoors, he never talked about that vice around his head. And
well, you think of the purpose he felt and the stimulation he was getting too, preoccupies a lot of that stuff. I mean, most of us will admit to ourselves, if not to others, that, when we're just laying around and not doing much, it's really easy to focus kind of on what's not right and what our pain levels are. But when we're busy, it takes our mind off of those things. And, that's a perfect example of that. Absolutely perfect example. The other thing I wanted to make a comment on, you talked about the can'ts and the don'ts that all turn into we won't do that. And yet you went in with the what if, and the what if is two-sided. The what if we can do this? What if Merv can do this? And what if he can't? Well, then we'll adapt. I mean, it's a real simple thing, but to take away the possibility of the what can we do is just, it's so sad to me, and it's a stigma that, to me is one of the biggest priorities that needs to change. And, it's just a beautiful thing to watch people blossom. And yet there are still a lot of people in the world that can't be happy for someone else succeeding in a goal. No, dementia or not. I mean, that's just not their style. It's not their thing, because it's, what about them? And yet, I just get such great joy being able to celebrate what someone else has succeeded in. I just think that is so cool. And not only what they've succeeded in, but then you look at, that ripple effect of all the other people that you're giving hope to and that are now questioning what they can't do or what they don't do or what they wouldn't do before. And they're saying, what if? Let's try this. That to me is so powerful. And it's such a beautiful, in your book, it's such a beautiful way to tell it through stories. If it's, an interview like this or on TV or through print with your book or an article. I mean, those things are so empowering. And I think people are really hungry for the possibilities of good things in their life. And I can't imagine, I mean, I didn't do anything like this with my own mom, but I can't imagine the legacy memory that would leave with you as an individual, along with the rest of the family and friends, and even the hometown. I would think probably lifted your dad up too when you landed back after your trip. Was that something that got publicity for you? Cool.
I guess, so, to back up to your what ifs, which I think is such a good point, and the what ifs is both possibility and failure, right? So exploring both of those and the willingness to undertake and put in action when there's a what if scenario. And that I referenced earlier on day 10 when we were in Vesuvius, Virginia, after the cold, where it was like, you know what, I don't know, this might be too much. And so that's where we caught, I caught myself suddenly focused on we're not doing we're not getting this many miles per day. We're not, oh my God. And I found myself focused on the can'ts, what we're not doing. And so I had to catch myself and stop and say, well, wait a minute. Well, what can we do? And so, we made that adjustment in terms of the temperature. And then, we made a couple other minor adjustments. And then most importantly, we just changed. We said, at one point Merv said, I think you should go on, you should go on by yourself. And I was like, no, that's not the point of this. Yeah. And we realized, you know what? We've got X number of days. We'll bike as far as we can. And if that gets us 2 more states, that's good. That's amazing. If it gets us 4 states, even better. If it gets us 6 states, even better. But we had to be willing to just do what we could. And so that took a lot of the pressure off. And then sure enough, we went all the way. But that reframing, because it's easy to get focused on, again, what we're not doing, what we can't. Instead of, well, wait a minute. You don't have to. Everyone doesn't have to bike across the country. Can they bike, 5 miles? That might be the big victory for someone. Yeah. And then per your your comment on the kind of the hometown pride, any sort of I think so many experiences. There's 2 ways to think about the value of those experiences. There's the real time enjoyment or lesson, the achievement, whatever that is. But once you've done that, there's residual value for the rest of your life. And so, you talked about kind of legacy. And so here was a case where Merv, once he got back, and Merv is like the humblest guy, super humble, the epitome of humility, and never one to puff his chest. But when he got back, and kind of word spread, and at the first, the kind of independent living center, and then he was in assisted living, then he was in memory care. But everywhere he went, word would travel that this was the guy that had biked across the country. And people would come up and say, hey, aren't you the one? And you would see Merv glow. And so for 4 years, his last 4 years, he just had this wonderful residual value of that journey. It was not only the memories, but it was like, it just continued to pay dividends. And I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and not just to himself, but like you said, to so many others. The other thing I want to just mention too, when you talked about the possibility and the failure, For me, a dementia, and it sounds like you've learned this as well, but it taught me to kick perfection and failure both to the curb. They weren't in my vocabulary anymore, and they still aren't, because perfection makes us stall out or quit, or and it makes us judge ourselves and others when there's so many different ways to be able to get something done and still feel valued and good about it. And that whole thing about failing, it's just like, no, we need to live this life in a fluid fashion that meets our needs, that meets the moments. And why in the world would we, smush that to the ground and not think that that's valuable, to meet the needs and meet the moment? I don't understand that. And I see so many people kind of just get wrapped up in that whole thing, and creativity goes out the window, and you must be a bed in a box, or a bed in a bag. It has to be done like this, and you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. No skipping around. It's got to be in this order and in this time frame, or be damned you all, and it's like, no, that's not life. That's not how we live our everyday life, and yet we don't appreciate what being spontaneous and what being fluid and what really recognizing what the needs are in the moment. How valuable that is. I just think that those are such critical points that you brought up, and I really appreciate that.
I love your choice of the word. I love your choice of the word moment. And I don't know if you ever, one of the best books that I read through all this was Moments of Joy by Joy Brackey. And I just love that. And so, as I, during these kind of the last 4 years from the bike journey on, for me it was all, and this I just think is such good advice for anyone, any caregivers, anyone going through this with, family, friends dealing with Alzheimer's. It's finding those moments of joy. And really your key currency is smiles. Are they smiling? And it doesn't matter if they're smiling, you don't need words. A smile communicates so much more than anything else. And so I became kind of this, is Dad smiling? You know what? Then it doesn't matter. Oh, well, no, we got to do it this way. It doesn't matter. He's smiling. That's what I want. And then, the second you talk about fluidity, which I think is a great word, I thought of it really, and it became even more the further along we went. But it was there. I had to do this dance between rationality and make believe, and give you a practical example. Something we visit my dad. He comes out into the lobby and he has some. There's some lobby coffee there, and he says, "Oh my God, this coffee's so good. It's great." And then, a friend or a family member says, "Well, this is, you can get this anytime, right? Like it's always here." And our instinct is, you can come out whenever you want. And I did that myself the first few times. And then after a while, it was just simply a pause, a smile back, and this really is the best coffee, isn't it? And you just, and you enjoy that. And it's a magical moment.
Well, it's about simplicity. And, another thing I think the disease taught me was how to play again. Because you said, you're doing this dance between your reality and their reality. And so often when you step into theirs, all the complications just melt away. And it just gets down, like you said, to that moment of appreciating something. And so often in life, we are so busy and so fast-paced. We've been told since we were little to, slow down and smell the roses, but most people don't do that. And I was on
That's right.
I was on a meeting last night, and it was a meditation, and somebody had channeled, and I don't think I'll get this exactly right. I don't have it in front of me, but I thought it was beautiful. And what was channeled to them was find your space where there is no time, because time is such a pressure cooker for us. And just find that silence, find that quiet, find that peacefulness. And I just thought, Oh, that was, to me, it just brought me a lot of comfort in saying it's okay to be still. And I don't know if you know Harry Urban. He's out in Pennsylvania. He's been living with dementia for, 15 years now. And one of the things that he says that I think care partners can't hear enough of was, I like to relax. Before I got dementia, I still do. You do not have to keep me busy just because it makes you feel better. Sit on the bench next to me, feel the breeze on your face, smell the flowers, feel the sun, and just be at peace within this big world in which we live. And so often we just blow that stuff past us and don't appreciate how important those moments are until maybe we've lost a loved one. And we think of, gosh, it was kind of nice just to sit on the couch and hold hands or in complete silence, but just feel safe and content. And there really isn't anything better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
With that.
Those are beautiful moments of this beautiful, simple.
Well, and you mentioned about paying attention to the smile, but it's the twinkle in the eyes or the dimples or the light giggle or just a gesture that they did. I think we have to learn to pay attention to multisensory connections. I think we take them for granted. And when someone is diagnosed, especially with dementia, it seems to me, and tell me if you agree with this or not, but it seems to me most people put pressure on, speak a sentence to me, call my name. I mean, we're so hell bent on use the right words to communicate. But yet when we're out in a store or, we are playing with a grandchild, we're picking up on all of those multisensory things, but people just get, it's like how they weigh how someone is doing, and they limit the communication, which then, gives angst to everybody with that.
Yep.
Did you feel that as well, that people kind of, up the ante on proper words and sentencing and, time frames being used versus really how's someone feeling?
I certainly would see, again, on these 73 days, I would see Merv's frustration in trying to communicate where he just couldn't find the words. And, but I was, and in particular on this journey, I was really impressed with how patient other folks were. And I think, again, maybe that's different when you've got a cyclist versus you're in town. Because I agree that, we're an impatient society to begin with. And, now we're 148 characters or whatever we are. And, but on a positive, I was really impressed with how, even in Virginia, it was like maybe day 3 before we got into Charlottesville, we were pulling up and we stopped and we asked this gentleman, name was Overton McGee. That's his name, this great Virginian name, and like an 8th generation Virginian, and asked him about a restaurant recommendation in the next town up. And he said, "Hey, I'm sorry to tell you that it's been closed down for the last year or whatever. But hey, you're more than welcome to join my daughter and I for lunch. For lunch." And so we go in, and it turns out that he has this whole legal background that my dad had. And so even though my dad was having halting conversation, there was just this wonderful connection because they, knew certain people in common and had run a similar path. And so, it's just a reminder of let's focus on what we can do instead of what we can't.
Right. Now, we only have about 6 minutes left, but I want to ask you 2 more questions. One, if you can kind of summarize for anyone who's thinking of doing something similar, and it might not be biking, it might be another hobby or adventure, and then also just general advice that you have for people as a whole who are dealing with dementia.
Yeah. So I guess just, anyone undertaking, a big adventure, I think I think the first, and I'm glad you said, for us, I guess the call to action really is, seize the day, whatever that means to you, with someone you love. And maybe it could be a bike, it could be a journey, it might be, gardening, it might be something else. But whatever it is that you dream of doing with that loved one, go out and do it. And so I think from a execution standpoint, it's okay, well, break that down into small steps. So literally for us, while we had this big vision, there was kind of some basic preparation that we did. And what I find is, for me, this is a personal taste, you can prepare as much as you want. And and some people over prepare, and then there's no spontaneity. There's no, oh, hey, someone invited us in for lunch. No, we can't go because we've got to be there by, this. And so I found that kind of a 70 to 80% preparation for adventure is make sure that we don't die, we don't get seriously injured, but there's a lot of flexibility to what we're doing. And I absolutely needed flexibility on this trip. So that was good. I think anyone undertaking any sort of adventure, it's like, break it down into small steps and then be flexible on how you, and adapt as you go, whatever that is. Again, it could be a gardening project, could be, there's just limitless possibilities. So yeah, I guess that would be the thing about an adventure. And then on just general advice for folks, we touched on a couple of things. I mentioned just the moments of joy, currency of smiles. I think that's for folks dealing with Alzheimer's, a dance between rationality and make believe. If you're rigid and not willing to make that dance, it's going to be tough. And you can actually have fun with it the way you might with as a 9-year-old playing, if you are willing to be fluid and do that dance. Third point I think would be connect with other people, other caregivers, other folks going through this. It was huge for me to be able to talk with some friends that were either a little further along or a couple steps behind. Just more than anything, just besides, but also just some laughs at the craziness of it. And I think that's so healthy. And then one of the most, I talked about this kind of these tough conversations that I had in Idaho and Oregon with my dad. I found the book Being Mortal by Atul Gawande incredibly helpful, and in particular, which is really about how societies look at the last quarter of life. But within that, there were these 4 questions that when I used those in conversation, it opened up our conversation so much more. And at the end, Merv basically said, "Hey, that's one of the best conversations we've had in a long time. Thank you." And and those 4 were basically, what's your understanding of where you are with your health? And let him talk. And then what are your concerns? Let him talk. What are your hopes? Let him talk. And then what would a good day look like? Let him talk. And, so often we're, but you got to do that. And so for me to ask literally those 4 questions and then shut my mouth and let him talk, and a couple little follow-up questions, but really let him talk, that totally changed his kind of, his state of being, and very powerful.
Well, we're not a good society of listeners, and we're always correcting, or we're thinking, what are we going to say? What are we going to say back? And yet all of us love validation. We love being heard, not just listened to, but really heard and allowed to speak our thoughts where we're not being manipulated because someone else is saying something else. And I think that's a wonderful advice to give people is, ask an open-ended question and let them speak whatever is on their mind. I do want to make sure that people know that they can go to Amazon and, plug in either your name or the book, Conversations Across America, Alzheimer's Transamerica ebook you've got as well. So This has just been a wonderful conversation, Kari. I really appreciate your time and you sharing your story with us all here. So thank you so much.
So much for having me, Lori.
Wonderful. For our listeners, I hope you like, click, and share this story. Give people hope of what is possible. And don't think about what you can't do, but think about and focus on the what if, especially when you kick perfection and failure to the curb. You can always adapt. That's what life is about. Thanks, everyone. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Lori LeBay, and I wanted to tell you about Alzheimer Speaks, which is another great podcast. You see, my own mother lived with dementia for 30 years, and I felt lost. Did you know every 3 seconds someone in the world is being diagnosed with dementia? Odds are it's going to hit your families too. We want to help you connect to services, products, tools, research, and stories so you can be prepared. Please subscribe to Alzheimer Speaks on your favorite podcast platform.